자, 대충 리방입니다. 리하. 재원님이 1바! 샤샤샤. 뭐, 아직도 와리가리 좀. 29.5, 야. 뭐, 한 틱도 틀림없이 딱 29.5. 여기서 반등하는 거, 아유, 그냥 밀 줄 알았는데. 꽤 반등합니다, 또 와리가리. 1시 10분봉 밖에 가는데 직전 캔들 양봉 도지 아슬아슬하게 요거 29.5 요거 29.5 자, 리방 완료했고요. 저 잠시 하고 돌아올게요. 잠시요. 이제 1시 35분 서울 연준의장 연설 하나 남았어. 중요한 거 그쵸? 잠시요. 코코님 리아, 재호님 스트콘. 와리가리가리 야야야. 저점 확인 또 올 것 같은데. (40에서) 또 반등해. (1시 10분봉) 야, 2시간째 양봉도지. 저점이 똑같아요. 29.5. 전전 캔들의 고점은 75.25, 이거는 69.75. 참. 지현님 리하. 1시 35분 파월 형님 기다려봅니다. 아니면 저점 근처 오면 또 매수. 어, 53에서 미는 거 센데. 53이면 아이씨, 시장가로 들어가.
매도 동의 접수되었습니다. 매도 동의 체결되었습니다.
53, 54. 아니구나. 여기까지 봐야 되네. 57. 자, 와리가리 저점 확인 가자. 시원하게. 못 준다 이제. 밀어 그냥. 47.25, 47.5. 지금 움직이는 캔들의 300틱의 고점이 47.25. 40 살짝 밀고 40을 깨야 돼. 일단 40을 깨야 돼. 오케이. 저점 확인 가자. 이제 29.5를 악착같이 지킨다. 34 36 홍포가 36 그래봐야 13포 12포 아우 38.25 38.25 40 오케이. 예. 여기서 밀어야 돼. 여기서 톡 튀어 올라오면 그냥 털어버려요. 44에. 반등한다. 아유. 털어라. 징글징글 진짜. 43까지 반등. 예, 프로방스님, 예, 오랜만이에요. 지난주 한 주, 예, 제가 미리, 예. 올퍼 형님이시구나. 올퍼 형님, 맞아. 올퍼 형님. 지난주, 한 주, 저 BJ 방송 쉬었어요, 예. 맞아, 올퍼 형님. 야, 주연님 날카롭다. 야, 맞아. 눈썰미. 36.75 왔는데, 이거를. 32. 쭉 밀어. 올퍼 형님, 예, 오랜만에, 너무너무 반갑습니다. 지난 한 주, 밀렸던 일, 오랜만에 일 잘 마무리하고 왔어요. 날씨가 좀 굳어가지고. 날씨가 좀 도와줬으면 그냥 깔끔 마무리였는데. 빗길에 운짱. 힘들었어. 다 왔어. 오케이. 한 번 추네. 33.5 짤목했어. 민주 단타 100% 300%. 그래요? 민주에 빠졌어요. 요즘 뭐 어떤 종목이요? 어제는 메세라, 그쵸? 메세라가 100%는 아닌데 60%? 63%? 저 이거 갖고 있었거든요. 근데 예전에 갖고 있었어. 진작 털었고. 야, 저점 미네. 요번에는 그래 29.5 저점 밀 거 같았는데 살짝 이거 반등하고 이게 밀어버리네. 이제 제가 작성해 놓은 자리가 880, 884, 854, 820. 그 전에도 있네. 슈퍼리거요? 그건 또 뭐예요? 민주 움직임 서로 그 저 토론방이 있는데 월스트리트 벳 레딧 커뮤니티에 거기서 좀 정보는 얻을 수 있는데 그쵸. 엔터프라이즈 종목이에요. 어허.
move ahead. Got a couple numbers I could text instead.
919.5 반등 괜찮네.
But not the way you guess. I just need to clear my head. And now I'm doing my best. You know how it gets. I act like I'm fine without you. But that's far from the truth. And it could fade.
어디서 미는 겁니까? 928.5. 915 반등 괜찮다. 어디까지
매수 주문이 접수되었습니다.
저점 못 지키면 손절. 야야야야, 바싹 쫓아갔는데 체결 안 하고 갔어요. 아야, 아쉽네 이거는.
취소 주문이 접수되었습니다.
Every story comes too late, and now I'm left with empty space. So run away from me. Don't let this love turn into grief. I was blind, now I see you deserve to be free. Run away from me. Take the pain, take the memories. If you stay, you'll only bleed. So baby, just run from me. We had fire, we had gold. Now it's ashes on the floor. All the songs we used to sing sound like strangers in the wind. I'm not asking you to stay, not another price to pay. I just want you to know you were the best part of.
반등 전에 아직 좀 남았는데.
So run away from me. Don't let this love turn into grief. I was blind, now I see you deserve to be free. Run away from me. Take the pain, take the memories. If you stay, you'll only bleed. So baby, just run. All the lights fade away. Oh, I can't make you stay. Run away from me. Don't let this love turn into grief. I was blind, now I see you deserve to be free. Run away from me. Take the pain, take the memories. If you stay, you only bleed. So baby, just run from me.
아, 강등 잘하네. 와, 아슬아슬 체결 직전이었는데 그거를 체결 안 시켜주고. 한틱 두틱. 915. 당일 저가 일단은 24,915. 당일 고가 25,026. 진폭이 오늘 큰 거 아니에요, 그쵸? 111포. 야, 진짜 좋았네. 915에서 방금. 아이.
I'm not that easy to tame. You should see me under these lights. All my fears turn to fire. That's the sweetest escape. Every time the beat comes alive, I'm not burned through the night. Bet you get it now. Oh, I'm that didn't I? Don't get it twisted. Know who's in charge. Think you're running that? Guess we're taking back. You know I walk it. Yeah, talk it, close your eyes, count to 3, burn it. Burn it. Burn it. Burn it. So come with me, I'll take you home. Every spark of your life, you know I'm gonna hit that. You light, so come with me. Light it up, run it down. Watch me run through the stage. I'm alright, something on my girls are on the way. Watch me open up the flame. Wanna see you vibing, baby, bouncing to the bass. Are you not in feel bad, didn't I? Don't get it twisted, know who's in charge. Think you're running there,
아야.
you're going back, you know I walk it. Yeah, I talk it, close your eyes, count to three, burn it.
주연이 오늘 매수 차 한 대 뽑아요. 사람 무한하게.
Turn it up, feel the flame, let my fire take the stage. Turn it up, hotter now, set this night on fire somehow. So come with me, I'll take you high. Bring the dawn, spark up your light. You know I got the heat that you like. So come with me, light it up, burn it down. Mirrors through the night, keep me no quiet, I can feel it and bright. Hypnotize, screen go wet, take you beside me, the touch and fade away. I hear you breathing in my head, cold on my got out. Are you real or just a dream? Oh yeah, that kiss all we need. Hold me in this digital starlight, and you look but it feels so right. How did you like wait on day to see you? I only saw my only life falling. I'm falling into you. Can't you see as I am kinda true? Whisper softly, don't let go. Cold, cold, not gone forever, yo. 시선을 감은 fragment 기억은 오미 미다시대 유명도 겐지 no borderline kimi to odoru just tonight every line of you in binary 마르데 poetry 너 연이 너 다시 다가와도 불가나 or just the air surrounding me holding in this digital starlight and I look but it feels so right how did you like wait on day to see you I only spend my only life falling I'm falling into you can't you see as I am kinda true whisper softly don't let go couldn't forever you know it's got corner link
음흠. 자, 파월 등장 5분 전이죠.
이 끝에서 널 만난다. 얼마나 기다렸는지 몰라. 네가 떠나놓고 인거했던 시간. 오늘은 드디어 널 만나는 날. 창문 틈 사이로 스며든 밤의 바람이 내 맘을 흔들어 별빛이 조용히 속삭인다. 이제 곧 너를 안게 될 거야. 비행기 소리가 들려온다. 조금씩 더 커진다. 내 심장 소리도 함께 뛰어가도 설레임이 가슴을 채운다.
5분 전.
걸어나온 네가 떠올라. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 나를 보며 달려앉는다. 이 밤의 숨결이 우리 둘을 감싸고 있다면 난 공원 가는 길 너로 가는 길
4분 전.
매일 전화기를 붙잡고 그리움 속에 잠들던 난 달력에 오늘을 표시해 놓고서 다가오는 날짜만 세워왔어. 가오는 불빛 아래 서 있는 수많은 사람들 속에서 네가 웃으며 다가오는 순간 세상이 멈춘 듯 느껴져. 비행기 소리가 가까워진다. 조금씩 더 선명해진다. 내 두 손이 떨려오는 지금 모든 기다림이 끝난다. 7, 8, 7, 6, 6 점점 걸어나오는 네가 보여. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 나를 보며 달려앉는다. 이 밤의 숨결이 우리 둘을 감싸고 있다면 난 공원 가는 길 널 보러 가는 길 아무 말도 필요 없는 순간 널 아는 채로 눈을 감아. 멀리서 들려오는 엔진 소리마저 오늘은 우리의 노래 같아. 이 길 끝에서 널 만난다. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 넌 날 보며 달려앉는다. 이 밤의 숨결이 우리 둘을 감싸고 있다면 난 공원 가는 길 널 보러 가는 길.
자, 파월 나옵니까?
One of the highest honors and greatest privileges of his life was commanding his fellow soldiers. He served in the 82nd Airborne Division and eventually joined the faculty at West Point, where he served until August of 1979, resigning from active duty as a captain, but continued to serve where he left with the rank of major in 1991. In law school, the senator was an attorney in private practice back in Providence. He served 3 terms in the Rhode Island State Senate and 3 terms in the United States House. And in 1996, the people of Rhode Island elected him to succeed Claiborne Pell as the state's 46th United States Senator. He has worked every day since to help make the federal government more efficient, effective, and responsive to the people of Rhode Island. He has a proven record of working on a bipartisan basis to help solve problems and achieve results. Many of us in this room also had the opportunity to go to his Business Leaders Day in Washington recently, and we saw firsthand the respect of his peers from both sides of the aisle. He is the senior member of the powerful Appropriations Committee, which controls the funding of the United States government, and has worked tirelessly to direct federal funding to the Ocean State. He is one of just 8 United States senators in the history of the United States Senate to graduate from West Point, and has used that knowledge as the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, where he's played a pivotal role in safeguarding our nation and growing Rhode Island's defense sector. And as senior member of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, he has authored several key pieces of legislation, including historic Wall Street reforms, and has been a nationally recognized leader for his dedication to protecting.
갑자기 뭐 장태현봉이야.
Today,
재호님 이모.
he learned growing up in
아직 안
Cranston,
났어.
which were deepened in the Army and have been tested in the halls of Congress, and stands up and speaks out for hardworking
이거
for the
맞습니까?
heart and
네,
soul of this
맞죠.
country. He is
파월.
dedicated to the nation's security and ongoing prosperity.
파월이 안
Senator, we are
나오고.
grateful for your
네.
support for this event, for the work of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, your advocacy for our members and their businesses, and for being a champion for our state, and putting into
이거 맞네요.
practice each and every day the values that you learned at that kitchen table on Pontiac Ave in Cranston. Senator Jack Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Rick, for that extraordinarily kind introduction. I also want to thank Lori White for her great leadership and all the members of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce. To all my colleagues in government, thank you for joining us here today. I want to particularly shout out to Susan Collins, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, an extraordinary public servant, and President Mark Delange of the University of Rhode Island. He has really taken a great university and made it even greater. Thank you, Mark. Today, I have a distinct honor. That is to welcome Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, back to Rhode Island. Along with many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I have long appreciated Chairman Powell's decency and steady leadership and commitment to the values that distinguish America from every other country in the world. He has the distinction of having been appointed by a Republican president and reappointed by a Democratic president. He has shown the courage to make tough decisions in an exceptionally challenging economic and political environment. And he has made these decisions based on the data and the facts and good analysis. And that is something increasingly rare these days. It feels like a much different world today than the last time Chair Powell addressed us in 2019. The COVID-19 pandemic brought substantial economic upheaval, including unemployment rates we had not seen for decades. That crisis was followed by a serious bout of inflation. And in fact, every economist, left and right, were predicting not about the coming recession, but how severe it would be. Because of
파월이 안 나오고.
there was no recession.
누굽니까?
Chair Powell deserves credit for navigating those choppy waters. Nevertheless, average Americans are still facing significant economic challenges due to the chaotic policy agenda of the current administration. Tariffs, health care cuts, a massive debt increase, and interventions in the operations of major corporations and universities have all proved disruptive and costly. Real wages for most American workers remain stagnant. We still have not fully tamed inflation. Roughly 36 million Americans are experiencing poverty, and housing is too expensive and in too short a supply everywhere, but particularly here. The policy chaos has extended into a direct assault on the Fed's independence and personal attacks by the President against members of the Fed. But Chair Powell has met these challenges with equanimity and professionalism. He understands that a strong and independent central bank can contribute to sound economic policy in this nation. He understands the impact that monetary policy has on communities and families and businesses. He has somehow managed to stay laser focused on achieving the Fed's dual mandate to
뭐예요? 멈췄네. 더.
As the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, where he's played a pivotal role
Yeah,
in
아닌데.
safeguarding our nation and growing Rhode Island's defense sector.
아, 파월 나왔어요. 다른 걸로 봐야 돼.
Thank you for your warm reception, and thank you, Senator Reid, for your very kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be back in Rhode Island, and the last time I had the opportunity to speak to the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, as Lori mentioned, was in the
야후
fall
파이낸스
of
괜찮네.
2019, actually November 25th, 2019, and I said then, quoting, "If the outlook changes materially, policy will change as well." Well, little did any of us know, just a couple of months later, the COVID-19 pandemic arrived. Both the economy and our policy evolved dramatically in ways that no one could have predicted. Along with actions by Congress, the administration, and the private sector, the Fed's aggressive response helped stave off historically severe downside risks to the economy. The COVID pandemic came on the heels of the painfully slow, decade-long recovery from the global financial crisis. And these two back-to-back world historical crises have left behind scars that will be with us for a long time. In democracies around the world, public trust in economic and political institutions
코비드 이후에 회복하는 게 참
those of us who are in
힘들었어요.
public service at this time need to focus tightly on carrying out our critical missions to the best of our ability in the midst of stormy seas and powerful crosswinds. Throughout this turbulent period, central banks like the Fed have had to develop innovative new policies that were designed to deliver on our statutory goals during times of crisis, rather than for everyday use. Despite these two unique, extremely large shocks, the U.S. economy has performed as well or better than other large advanced economies around the world. And as always, it's essential that we
경제
continue to
전망에 대한 지금
learn
연설.
the right lessons from these difficult years, and that process has been ongoing now for more than a decade. So, turning to the present day, the U.S. economy is showing resilience in the midst of substantial changes in trade and immigration policies, as well as in fiscal, regulatory, and geopolitical arenas. These policies are still emerging, and their longer-term implications will take some time to be seen. Recent data show that the pace of economic growth has moderated. The unemployment rate is low but has edged up. Job gains have slowed, and the downside risks to employment have risen. At the same time, inflation has risen recently and remains somewhat elevated. In recent months, it has become clear that the balance of risks has shifted, prompting us to move our policy stance closer to neutral.
네, 지금 코코님이 얘기하시고 지금 연설하고 있네. 얘기한 내용이.
GDP rose at a pace of about 1.5% in the first half of this year, down from 2.5% last year. The moderation in growth largely reflects a slowdown in consumer spending. Activity in the housing sector remains weak, but business investment in equipment and intangibles has picked up from last year's pace, largely reflecting the AI build-out. As noted in the September Beige Book, which I bet you wonder what it is, the September Beige Book, that's a report that gathers qualitative information from across the Federal Reserve System. We'll talk about it later. Businesses continue to say that uncertainty is weighing on their outlook. Measures of consumer and business sentiment declined sharply in the spring. They have since moved up, but remain low relative to the start of the year. In the labor market, there has been a marked slowdown in both the supply of and the demand for workers, an unusual and challenging development. In this less dynamic and somewhat softer labor market, the downside risks to employment have risen. The unemployment rate edged up to 4.3% in August, but has remained relatively stable at a low level over the past year. Payroll job gains slowed sharply over summer months as employers added an average of just 29,000 per month over the past 3 months. The recent pace of job creation appears to be running below what we call the break-even rate, that is the rate needed to hold the unemployment rate constant. But a number of other labor market indicators remain broadly stable. For example, the ratio of job openings to unemployment remains near 1, and multiple measures of job openings have been moving roughly sideways, not down, as have initial claims for unemployment insurance. Inflation, meanwhile, has eased significantly from its highs of 2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer-run goal. The latest available data indicate that total PCE prices rose, that's personal consumption expenditure prices, that's the inflation measure that we follow most closely.
PC 이제 내일 모레 나오는데
in August, up from 2.3% in August
연준이
2024.
선호하는 통화정책 결정할 때
Volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.9% last month, also higher than a year ago. Goods prices, after falling last year, are driving the
PC가 안
pickup in
떨어진다.
inflation. Incoming data and surveys suggest that those price increases largely reflect higher tariffs rather than broader price pressures. Disinflation for services continues, including for housing services. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up on balance over the course of this year on news about tariffs. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term inflation expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. The overall economic effects of the significant changes in trade, immigration, fiscal, and regulatory policy remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the tariff-related effects on inflation will be relatively short-lived, a one-time shift in the price level. Now, a one-time increase does not mean all at once. Tariff increases will likely take some time to work their way through supply chains. As a result, this one-time increase in the price level will likely be spread over several quarters and show up as somewhat higher inflation during that period. But uncertainty around the path of inflation remains high. We will carefully assess and manage the risk of higher and more persistent inflation. We'll make sure that this one-time increase in prices does not become an ongoing inflation problem. Turning to monetary policy, near-term risks to inflation are tilted to the upside, and risks to employment are tilted to the downside, a challenging situation. Two-sided risks mean that there is no risk-free path. If we ease too aggressively, we could leave the inflation job unfinished and need to reverse course later to fully restore 2% inflation. If we maintain restrictive policy too long,
아, 이 얘기 방금
will soften
했었죠.
unnecessarily. When our goals are in tension like this, our framework has long called for us to balance both sides of our dual mandate.
레이버 마켓 고용시장
The
둔화
increased downside
때문에
risks to employment have shifted the
즉각적인
balance of
금리
risks to
인하를
achieve
시행을
our
했고
goals. We therefore judged it appropriate
앞으로
in our last
도전적인
meeting to take another
상황이
step to work toward a more neutral policy stance,
직면에 있다.
lowering the target range for the federal funds rate by 25 basis points to 4 to 4.25%. This policy stance, which I personally see as still modestly restrictive, leaves us well positioned to respond to potential economic developments. Our policy is not on a preset course. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We remain committed to supporting maximum employment and bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans, and we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. So thank you again for having me here, and I very much look forward to our discussion. Thanks.
뭐야? 뭐 이걸로 끝이야? 고용과 기조연설이었구나. 예, 고용과 인플레 모두 지금 안 좋은 상황이 있죠.
Thank you very much.
Q&A 시간.
Good afternoon once again, Mr. Chair. Thank you for those opening remarks and reminding us just how tremendously the world has changed and evolved since you were last here in 2019. President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, Susan Collins, is also here with us today. And President Collins, we have had the opportunity many times to discuss with you the conditions in this Fed region, of which Rhode Island is part of the Boston region. So, Mr. Chairman, I would ask you to think about your
보스턴
comments
총재 수잔
reflecting
콜린스도
on the importance,
왔다
what you
갔습니다.
have said, the importance of deeply understanding local labor markets. And I'm wondering if in your deliberations leading up to the most recent FOMC meeting, whether there was anything particularly distinctive in what you saw coming out of the Boston Beige Book.
So let me say a word about the Beige Book. So there are 12 reserve banks, as you know, around the country, and each of them has deep ties into not just the business community, but medical community, educational community, nonprofits. And each FOMC cycle, which is sort of 8 of those a year, they do a deep dive and they collect lots and lots of information about the economy. And so, and that information gets collated and put into what we call the Beige Book because it's beige. And we're not that original. And so we get that a couple weeks before each FOMC meeting. And I have to say, I don't know of any source of sort of qualitative information about the economy that even approaches this. It's just a lot of conversations with a lot of people. I personally find it very useful. Sometimes you look at that book and you see significant regional differences, and this is not one of those times. So, for example, the Boston Fed piece in the last Beige Book talked about lots of spending on AI. Well, guess what? That was pretty common across 8 or 9 of the districts. So I would say nothing really jumped out from the Boston piece. What you saw was all around the country. You saw pretty modest growth, wage and price inflation at modest to moderate levels, the economy growing but not fast, and uncertainty, significant uncertainty about federal public policy is kind of weighing on investments and decisions about investment and hiring, except in the area of the AI build-out, which is just going really strong pretty much in many parts of the country.
시그니피컨트 어선턴티티 불확실성 때문에 연준이 뭘 결정하기가 참 힘들다.
What I saw from Boston was quite similar and overlapping with a number of other districts. Again, sometimes that's the case where things are pretty much of a piece. Sometimes different regions, particularly if there's a commodity pricing, you would see maybe things in the commodity-oriented regions doing differently from other regions of the country. Right now, it's much more the same around the country, I would say.
So let's talk about and build on what you described a few moments ago about the dual mandate of the Fed. And if you could talk about these conditions that wax and wane over time, what signals will you be looking for in the run-up to the next FOMC meeting, which is in roughly 30 days?
We have 2 goals, as you mentioned, maximum employment and price stability, and they're equal goals under the law. So almost all the time, they work together. They complement one another. So, for example, when the economy is weak, the unemployment rate might be high and the inflation rate would be low, and that it calls for stimulus from us. And when the economy is really strong, the labor market is tight, that's when inflation will be moving up, and so policy might be a little bit tighter. That's almost always the case. Right now is the quite unusual case where risks to, as I mentioned in my remarks, risks to employment are to the downside and to inflation to the upside. Now, we only have one tool, which is monetary policy, really interest rates, and really it's calling for different answers. So for a long time, we have a document called the Statement on Longer Run Goals and Monetary Policy Strategy. We call it the Consensus Statement to save time.
그냥 차트는 차트대로 움직이는 저항받을 자리에서 눌리고 저점 지키면서 915 지키면서 또 반등하고.
What we've done all year this year is we've had our policy rate has been tight because inflation has been above our target, but the labor market was very solid. Now, over the last really 4 months, really over the summer, the labor market has softened, payroll jobs have dropped a lot, so we can't really say that anymore. And I think what that
골드 금땡이 오늘도
really have a tight focus on
미쳤어요.
inflation, really
금탱이.
needs to moderate toward a more balanced approach. And so that's why we took the action we took at our last meeting. And we'll, as we go to our next meeting, to your question, we'll be asking ourselves, we'll be looking at the data very carefully, labor market data, growth data, inflation data, all of the vast quantities of data that we get, and asking ourselves, is there a policy in the right place? And if not, we move it there.
Some may wonder about the frothiness of the markets, markets reaching record heights and also record valuations. How does the Fed think about that in the equation?
Financial markets. So we monitor, obviously we monitor financial markets very carefully. Our policy works through financial conditions. So that's credit
이번에도
spreads,
저점
interest rate
지킵니까?
levels, and
915.
you know, equity prices in the aggregate.
아까는 917에서 반등.
For example, we look at all of that, but really our focus is on our two goals, and that is maximum employment and price stability. And when we see one of them weakening, you know, we're going to respond appropriately with our tools. And in this case, that meant reducing the federal funds rate by 25 basis points. And, you know, we'll see what the future brings, but that's what we do. We look carefully at financial conditions, more from a perspective, though, of financial stability. So we see that the banks are well capitalized. Actually, in the aggregate, households are in good shape financially. I know people at the bottom end of the income spectrum are under pressure. No question about that, but it's not a time of elevated financial stability risks.
So the federal funds rate really governs consumer credit, but not so as it pertains to mortgage rates, correct?
That's right.
And let's talk about how the average consumer is going to see.
그러니까 좀 비둘기 발언을 안 하고 있어요, 그렇죠? 10월 FMC 회의에서 고용시장 그리고 성장, 뭐 GDP 얘기하는 거 있어, 뭐 실물 경기, 인플레 데이터 다 검토하고 결정을 하겠다. 인플레 대응에서 균형 잡힌 접근 필요성이 필요하다. 베이지북 얘기했었죠 아까. 각종 데이터가 파월 베이지북 경제 완만한 성장세. 데이터 나오는 거 보면 아까 오늘 지표 좀 완만한 둔화죠, 둔화.
And they make an estimation of where they think rates are going, and so they'll price things in, and so you know longer rates will move because
515 지키면서 16.25에서 반등.
So you'll begin to see, and you're already seeing, you know, changes in rates long before we make the decision. It can often be already, you know, priced in.
Is it fair to say that the Fed and the markets really have a higher tolerance for risk today, more so than perhaps before the pandemic?
I think if you look at some prices, then they're elevated relative to historical levels. You know, there were times before the pandemic when you had, it happens periodically. Equity prices will move up and down, and we do monitor that. But we're not targeting any level of prices for particular financial assets. We don't have a view that we know what the right price of any particular financial asset is. We do look at overall financial conditions, and we ask ourselves whether our policies are affecting financial conditions in a way that is what we're trying to achieve. But you're right. It by many measures, for example, equity prices are
Let's segue to the topic of AI and largely AI stocks and periphery stocks really driving the markets in many ways. Let's talk a little bit about the great unknown of AI, and if we think about various ages, our industrial ages, whether it be steam to electricity to the information age, and now to the age of AI.
아까 트럼프
consider this to be the most
전쟁 여기저기 다 막았다. 수많은 인명을 구했다. 모두가 내가 노벨 평화상 수상해야 한다.
All the earmarks of emerging technology that could be very important.
7개 전쟁을 끝냈다, 트럼프.
But it's very early to be, to be making that kind of bold statement. So, you know, what we're seeing is companies and institutions like the Fed, for that matter, are starting to experiment with what they can, how this this new set of tools can be used in our operations. And it's very early days on that. And I think we have to wait and see. That's a good thing. I know many of the large financial institutions and other central banks, and we are asking ourselves, how can this help us do our jobs better? And I think it's going to be a period of experimentation over a period of years. And the history is always that there's a lot of fear that technological innovation will eliminate jobs. What has tended to happen in history over time is it just raises productivity and creates new jobs to replace the old jobs. And that happens. And sometimes it can take a long time, but ultimately that has been the pattern for the last couple of hundred years. Is this time going to be different? I just don't think we know yet. I don't think anybody knows.
You are a labor market futurist, also a historian, and the concept of AI and humans in the loop, very profound impact on the labor force. What are your thoughts about specifically agentic AI as a differentiator from generative AI, and how will the Fed be looking at the impacts of the workforce, the labor participation rate, given the unknown of what could happen with displacement around AI tools at all ends of the spectrum?
Our tools work on demand, basically. Lower interest rates, higher interest rates, they work on demand. When there are structural changes in the economy, there's not a lot that an interest rate change can do for that. And so if you're talking about distributional issues or labor force participation or retraining or any of the things that come to mind in connection with those questions, that's really going to be something for legislators and the private sector. We of course, we have many labor economists, and a good portion of them are studying what the potential effects of AI on the labor force, and many great economists around the country and around the world are publishing on that now. It really is too early to say. I think you can say that some jobs are going to be phased out. Some jobs are going to evolve, and people are going to be further trained and that sort of thing, and be able to keep a job like that. And there will be new jobs that come. And how will that balance work out, and what will be the timing of it? I think it's just quite hard to say.
But how does that factor into the deliberations on a near-term basis? Things are moving so quickly, and the observation and the argument that artificial intelligence isn't just impacting those entry-level jobs and those, quasi-unskilled jobs, but really tentacles reaching into highly skilled professions, whether it be finance, whether it be communications and media, whether it be healthcare, whether it be law, finance. So all ends of the spectrum, highly educated individuals down to more easily automated tasks. Sort of a really interesting problem for those of you that are studying labor market economics. How do you approach that?
Well, a lot of what we're doing with our time is trying to understand the current position of the economy, what's actually going on in the economy today. Pardon me. So part of that is hiring rate has really dropped. Job creation has dropped very sharply. So what are the factors there? So I mentioned earlier, I think, part of it just is there's a lot of uncertainty about the direction of public policy, and so companies are holding off. They're not hiring, and when you don't hire through attrition, your labor force shrinks, and you save money that way. That may be a way of passing on tariff costs. It may be something like that. So that's happening. Lots of questions around whether AI is a major factor associated with the relatively low hiring rate for people just graduating from school and just entering the labor market. And, people are doing studies on that, and I looked at one from Stanford, another from the New York Fed in the last week, and the sense of it was, we think we can find some evidence that generative AI is having it's one of the reasons here, but we can't really say it's the main reason. And you know, we have our Jackson Hole conference every year in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we had some great labor economists, and one of the big debates was what's going on with AI, and it was a professor from I want to say Columbia who just basically said there's no evidence that this is acting any differently than other. Her view was not acting any differently from other technological, movements, waves, and so I think she would be more at the end of an optimist, a techno optimist. We've all, there are books out there that will tell you the world is ending, and but I don't think we know. Again, I think we're going to see how this evolves, and again, if it does turn out to be
저점 깼나요? 깨졌네.
really
915, 908.
declines in a way that creates, social difficulties, that's going to be something that legislators and the private sector will have to address. You just don't know that yet.
Over the weekend, I read where you had been discussing, just picking up on what you said about Gen Z and college graduates and any possible disruptions in trying to find jobs. So Gen Z would be those born between 1997 and 2012, roughly ages 13 to 28. What are your thoughts on college enrollment? We'll talk a little bit about
파월이
and Jackson Hole because
조금
they're a favorite of yours, but
다른 내용이
a lot of
일단은
individuals in this room today may have family
저는
members that
전반적으로
fall squarely in that
비둘기파 발언이 아니에요.
13 to 28 category. What would you say about that?
고용시장에서 채용 둔화의 일부는 공공정책의 불확실성 때문이고 인공지능이 최근에 졸업생의 낮은 고용률에 미치는 영향에 대한 의문.
Overall national aggregate hiring rate is at very, very low level. The layoff rate is also at a very, very low level.
관세 비용 전가 때문에 고용 중단 현상이 생긴다.
Companies are they've kind of stopped hiring or slowed down their hiring because they want to see how this all shakes out. We're having very
상당히
important changes to
트럼프
economic policy in the
반
United States
트럼프적인
and
얘기
companies
계속
and people
하고
wondering
있네요.
how it's gonna work out. So I think that's part of it. The other thing I would add, though, is, there's a lot of good scholarship around technological innovation and inequality, if you will. And the sense of it is really that if schools and society give students graduating the skills and aptitudes they need to benefit from applied technology, you can have declining inequality over time. And that's what the United States had for
이 얘기도 했네요.
up until about 1970, when U.S. educational
저런
education
파월
plateaued.
지금 주가가 주식시장의 주가가
So it's really down
fairly
to
highly
skills.
valued.
So kids who come out of school today with technological skills,
밸류가 많이
if they work
꼈다.
with this new technology, they're probably going to be fine.
너무
They're gonna be great. If
고평가됐다.
you don't have those skills, though, you're
주식시장이.
increasingly left with less attractive employment options. So in a way, it's an educational issue.
아까 저 트럼프 연설할 때 유엔에서 연설할 때 주식시장 뭐 아주 좋고
Inequality.
전부 다 자기 치적처럼 얘기를 했죠.
Where the United States really has paced among countries throughout the world. Particularly, that was a subject that you initiated at Jackson Hole back in August. What are your thoughts on how that is likely to really change the way we look at technology as a force for productivity and advancement?
I mean, technology has been raising incomes and productivity for really a couple hundred years since the Industrial Revolution. It's been an amazing thing for the quality of human life, and there's no reason why that has to change. In the United States was the first country to have gender-blind secondary education, and if you go back, you'll see that there's a great book on this, but just basically the U.S. had fast technological innovation for a century, and also declining inequality because people were coming out and their educational capability, the capabilities they took out of the educational system gave them the ability to benefit from evolving technology. So, and that's really the key, because technology, what it does is it makes us more productive. I used to, one summer I worked on a project that was building houses, and I basically had a shovel and I just dug most of the summer. And now that would be a Bobcat, which can do 100 times the work, no blisters, no water breaks. It's just much more productive. And you see housing production's gotten, at least it did get for a while, much more productive, right? Not so much lately. But that I think is the story. And you know, while U.S. educational attainment, college graduation rates, and things like that leveled out, they're still going up. The rest of the world caught on and has really caught up in terms of educational attainment. And that really is the key. To your point, your educational system, your country is your educational system ultimately. It's the people that come out and what can they do, and a variety of other factors too, obviously. But I think that's a key element. I'm struck by this because this was a major factor at our recent conference, and we had a great conversation about it.
Well, tell us about the book. You gave me a homework assignment the other day, so I did download it, but I think everyone should follow that lead.
All right. It's a book called The Race Between Education and Technology. It's by Claudia Golden and Larry Katz, two Harvard economists, and it basically talks about the race between education and technology. So I recommend that to anybody. It was written in, I want to say, 2005, and they basically presented at Jackson Hole, they presented an update to the current day. The findings basically hold. It's very, you know, I mean, I'm not a PhD economist. I read it 20 years ago.
But you said it still holds very much true today.
It does. And I think it's a good explanation for why the U.S. has had, you know, rising inequality. This is their thesis, and I think it's they call it also skill bias technical change. So you need skills to benefit, but if you have those skills, then technology makes you more productive, and that's what we need. Incomes can only rise if productivity is increasing. We're sort of working as many hours as we can work now, so it really is down to how much output can you have in an hour, and that's productivity. So I would recommend that. I'm not getting any royalties for that, but by the way, Claudia Golden won the Nobel Prize for her work about 2 years ago. So I'm not the only one who thinks it was good work.
Chair Powell, let's move on to tariffs. This is an issue that confronts the business people and here with us today. You addressed it very briefly in your opening remarks. You indicated that you believe that the costs of the tariff movement is in fact more transitory than embedded in supply chains. So I think we appreciate hearing more about how the Fed thinks about evolving tariff policy.
So we're now collecting a good bit of revenue. The federal government collecting a good chunk of revenue, $300 or $400 billion a year pace. And the question is, who's paying that? And the candidates for paying those tariffs would be the exporter, the foreign exporter, or someone on our shores. It could be a company or a retailer, or someone who's using the imported product to manufacture something, or the end consumer. And so so far, in its incredibly early days, it doesn't look like the overseas exporters are carrying the bulk of it. It looks like it's that middle group. It's retailers and it's importers, and they're not passing along to consumers that much of the cost. So the actual effects on inflation have been quite modest so far. It's really not. It's a small amount, but I mean, for example, I mentioned that core PCE inflation is 2.9%. Maybe 0.3 or 0.4 of that is tariffs. So it's not the big factor. It's not a big inflationary thing, but it is something that is driving up inflation a bit. And the question is, are companies then, are they going to eventually be able to pass that stuff through, and then that might drive inflation up a little higher? So we've been watching this since the beginning. Half our mandate is inflation, and I would say that the pass through to consumers has been later and less than we expected. How much of that will continue, I don't know, but the responsible thing from our standpoint was to watch and wait, because it's our job to make sure we don't make a mistake on inflation.
Well, that was my question. Do you imagine that is going to change, where the cost of tariffs will be more deeply embedded and passed on to the consumer? What do you foresee as?
So our forecast, and I think almost all the forecasts are for there to be a one-time pass-through, which will go through the end of this year, well into next year, and that by the end of next year, the one-time increase from the tariffs will be done, and you'll be back to the non-tariff related inflation, which should be much closer to our 2% goal. That's almost everyone's base case. it's actually our job to make sure that that's the outcome, though. So we can't be in a situation where we're just going to assume that. We can't leave that part of the goal unguarded. And so that's why we've been careful about cutting. We didn't want to cut too early. I mentioned in my remarks, if we cut too early, we may find out in a year that inflation actually wasn't under control and it's back up to 3.5% or 4%. No one thinks this is the base case, but that's the risk of cutting too early or too much. Of course, the risk of cutting too late, as I mentioned, is that we unnecessarily, the labor market weakens unnecessarily. It's
저점 또
there's no
깨네.
risk-free path, and it's just it's a very
907.5.
difficult policy environment when your two goals are
900을 밀
two
것 같네.
different things. You've got to make a compromise, and we really again haven't been in that situation for many years. It does happen, but it's happened now, and we'll manage our way through it. But we sort of have to look at both of them as equal. We can't just say we're going to do this one and not that one, unless this one is clearly a greater risk. And now they're coming into closer balance, I would say. We do see meaningful weakness in the labor market now, very low job creation. The unemployment rate's still low, though, and the quits rate is low, and a lot of things suggest that the labor market has reached a kind of unusual stability of much lower demand and much lower supply for workers. It's a really unusual kind of a balance, if you want to call it that, but nonetheless, we think it's downside risk.
Well, if you could elaborate, what are some of the factors that are leading to
7.75.
depressed demand for labor?
So depressed demand for labor, based on surveys and talking to people who are doing hiring, a big chunk of it is that they're just unsure about what to do. Businesses, and I'd love to talk to people after this. Businesses don't want to do a lot of hiring. They may be postponing major capex, major initiatives, major acquisitions, and maybe they'll replace workers who retire, but they're not looking to grow. This isn't every company and every part of every company.
일단은 시장 좀
That's got to be
매도
part of it.
접수되었습니다.
비친화적인 발언을 하고
The
있어요.
supply side, of course, has a lot to do with immigration policy. So immigration was at a very high level for 2 or 3 years before this year, and now immigration has really gone close to zero, and immigration is not really contributing to the labor force growth now, whereas it's been most of what the labor force growth was, and now so at the same time you've got declining demand
매도 주문이
and also
체결되었습니다.
declining supply
900 깨기
of
전에
new workers.
One of your passions is demystifying the Fed. You enjoy speaking about it, and those that are Fed watchers are wondering, will there in fact be 2 additional rate cuts before the end of the year? Of course, we're uncertain about that, if I understood your comments correctly. What does it mean to demystify the Fed, and what can each of us in this room do to be better Fed watchers for the benefit of our own businesses?
20일까지 판단을 하겠네.
Years ago, maybe 40 years ago, and for a long time
나와라
before
또.
that, the main theory of central banking was to be mysterious and obscure. In fact,
위에서
Montague Norman, who's a very famous former head of the Bank of England, but ending in the middle of World War II,
매도 주문이
famously said,
접수되었습니다.
never apologize, never explain. And he thought that monetary policy worked.
그냥 미네.
It works best when no one
됐네.
understands. It's kind of mysterious. So starting maybe 40 years ago, a bunch of economists, including Alan Blinder and a number of others,
취소 주문이
said, that's
접수되었습니다.
wrong, because if markets and the public understand the way you'll react to incoming data, they'll kind of do your job for you. And so they
884.
argued for greater
아,
transparency.
883.
And people said, that makes sense. So central banks started to be
정도
transparent.
지지.
The Fed didn't even issue a
900은 깨고
post-Federal
그러면
Market Committee announcement until 1994. And then did so as
890.
an experiment just to see what would happen. Now, so if
892.
you fast forward through, the 30 years since
쭉 밀어봐라.
now
892.
we have post-meeting statement, we have minutes, we have press conferences, every FOMC participant
Press
is
release.
on Squawk Box, we have a press release. So, and maybe some people say it's too much, it's excessive, but so that's the way it's evolved. So we try really hard to communicate with the interested public in a way that is useful and comprehensible and jargon-free. That's what we focus on. And that's all we're trying to do. So we don't use their, every profession has their jargon, and you kind of need it for internal conversations, but we try not to do that. So that's all we're trying to do. So a couple of thoughts about what I would say. I can't make anyone a better Fed watcher, I don't think, but things I would want to tell people about the Fed. One is just this, that we're making decisions, our decisions are made under elevated levels of uncertainty, even in normal times. The economy is fundamentally, no one has been able to predict the economy more than for the next few months. It's an unpredictable, it's this enormous entity, and it's just not predictable. So we have to manage, we take very much a risk management approach, and one of the risks we're managing is that we don't
892.
exactly understand what the current state of the economy is and where it's going to go. Range of plausible outcomes, not just one outcome. So that's one thing. So we're never saying we know the economy is going to do this or we know it's going to do that, because honestly, it just
아,
famous statement is,
16에도
financial
접근을 해놨네.
forecasters are a humble lot with much to be humble about. So that's one thing I would say. Another is that you should, I just have to say this, whenever we make decisions, we're never ever thinking about political things. And so we're based in Washington D.C. and many people, Congress and they're often things are seen through a lens of, is it good for this party or bad for this party or this politician? We're just not looking at things that way. We're looking at what's the best thing for the people that we serve in the medium term. What's the best policy? And many people don't believe us because they think, come on, you're really political. But the truth is, most of the people who are calling us political is just a cheap shot. And also, we don't engage. We don't, our argument is doing our jobs. We don't get into back and forth with external people. We just do our jobs. We keep our head down and do our jobs. That's what we do. So those are two things I would offer about the Fed.
We have run out of time. We have come to the end of our program, and I'm wondering if there's anything additional that you'd like to
목표가
share
892요.
with the members here today, and again to help us be more prepared
다
as we begin
왔는데.
to look to 2026 and strategic plans for business and things on the horizon that would help to, of course, create more jobs and more prosperity.
So I'll say one more thing that struck me just now about the Fed, and that is, remember, we have a really important job: maximum employment price stability. We regulate, supervise the banks. We operate parts of the payment system. But those things are really about cyclical demand management and financial stability. The policies that really matter for the U.S. economy in the long run, things like investment, particularly investment in people.
아, 징그러워.
That's not something we can do. We
청산하고 싶다. 아, 이거 털 것 같네.
Compared to the things that really matter for the country, which are the things that Congress can do and the private sector can do,
아,
which are the
징그럽네.
things that will really matter for future generations. Are not
95.5.
interest rate policy, the things that we do as important as we are. And beyond that, I'll just say this has been
털리네. 아, 이런 참 진짜 이런 데니까. 아, 진짜 얄미워. 개싸게. 털고 간다 이제 또.
Most of my career was in the financial sector, and I constantly was out talking to people rather than sitting in my office looking at aggregate data on the economy. So this is a much more comfortable place to be.
자, 파월이 조금은
Your day look like?
Get home.
친시장적인, 그러니까 뭐 다음 FOMC 때 회의 때
Anyway, thank you so much.
금리 인하를 뭐 하겠다 뭐 이런 얘기는 절대 안 했어요. 좀 트럼프에 반하는 그런 얘기를 쭉 했고, 다음 FOMC 회의 때 뭡니까? 뭐 금리나 어떻게 뭐 확실하게 좀 해주겠다 뭐 이런 힌트도 없고. 조금은 매파적인 발언이었다고 봐야죠. 야, 911.5에서 민다. 어우.
setting sun. Your voice, it hums in the rustling tree.
아, 그만해야 되겠네.
A melody carried by autumn's rain.
여기서 여기까지 하고 쉬고 물러나겠습니다. 내일 뵐게요. 오늘 9월 23일 화요일 야간장 모두 고생 많으셨어요. 남은 시간 모두 성투하시고 남은 시간 모두 성투하시고 밤 되시고 내일 저녁 9시 다시 뵐게요. 방송은 한 30분쯤 후, 20분? 네, 30분쯤 후에 종료할게요. 자, 내일 다시 뵙겠습니다. 감사. 내일 다시 봬요. See you. 뿅뿅뿅. 샹큐 감사. 내일 뵐게요. 네, 감사합니다. 야, 작두 자리 884까지 왔어. 또 여기 밀 것 같네. 밀렸죠. 그 다음은 850, 820 뭐 이렇게 있는데. 자, 내일 뵐게요.
The clock may tick, but it won't erase the feel of your hand, the light in your gaze. Time doesn't heal, it only hides the ache of love that still resides. Tender memories, they don't let go. They're stitched to my soul as the seasons flow. Chasing whispers in the quiet night, hold the edge of dawn so tight. Drift like feathers on a silver stream, find the comfort in the in-between. The sky unfolds with threads of gold, soft horizons take their hold. The echoes hum where shadows part, dancing through the air, leaving secrets everywhere. Catch their rhythm, watch them play, feel the rush, then fade away. In the chaos there's a tune, underneath the rising moon, layered notes above the sands, flowing comfort in our hands. Let it flow, let it rise, like the moon paints the skies. Through the storm, through the still, flowing comfort bends the low. Fingers crossed under a sky so blue. The world turns round with something new. Whispers of hope in the morning light. The stars still gleam, though it's not yet night. Oh, something good will happen soon. A spark that dances under the moon. Hold tight the dream that's in your hand. Our time will rise like grains of sand. Every shadow's got a story to tell. Every echo rings like a magic spell. If we keep walking the trail of fire, a better road comes with each desire. Oh, something good will happen soon. A spark that dances under the moon. Hold tight the dream that's in your hand. Our time will rise like grains of sand. The wind forgets where it used to go. Tomorrow sings, though it whispers low. We'll climb the hill till the view is steep. What we sow today is what we'll reap. Oh, something good will happen soon. A spark that dances under the moon. Hold tight the dream that's in your hand. Our time will rise like grains of sand. secrets to the swaying trees. Petals fall like stars on the ground below, spelling words my heart longs to know. The world turns pink and the sun hangs low. It's a fleeting moment, but it steals the show. Gentle blooms with a story untold, fading fast but worth more than gold. Let me dance with the wind through the bloom, a fleeting beauty that banishes gloom. Hold the second in an endless smile. Life feels lighter when the cherry blossoms smile. Underneath their shade, the world feels still. Time bends softly and bends to my will. Every step through the pale snow brings me closer to truths I didn't know. Though they wither, they don't truly die. A promise of spring lingers in the sky. New blooms will return after the while. A cycle of joy when the cherry blossoms smile. Let me dance with the wind through the bloom, a fleeting beauty that banishes gloom. Hold the second in an endless smile. Life feels lighter when the cherry blossoms smile. Though they wither, they don't truly die. A promise of spring lingers in the sky. New blooms will return after the while. A cycle of joy when the cherry blossoms smile. Let me dance with the wind through the bloom, a fleeting beauty that banishes gloom. Hold the second in an endless smile. Life feels lighter when the cherry blossoms smile. Drifting through days that never align. Seconds unravel like threads so fine. glow of street lights humming soft and dim. The night wind sang a weary hymn. The stars are staring down on me with eyes that whisper, stay, be free. But in my chest a pull so strong. The place I'm from is where I belong. I'm going home where the rivers run deep, where the whispers of love cradle my sleep. I'm going home where my heart can be loud, where the sky lets me dream past the clouds. The city calls with silver chains. Its promises all feel the same. But I've got dust still on my skin from where my story first begins. Through these fields where silence grows, where the wild wind knows all my woes. The ground remembers every fall and lifts me up to hear it call. I'm going home where the rivers run deep, where the whispers of love cradle my sleep. I'm going home where my heart can be loud, where the sky lets me dream past the clouds. Through these fields where silence grows, where the wild wind knows all my woes. The ground remembers every fall and lifts me up to hear it call. I'm going home where the rivers run deep, where the whispers of love cradle my sleep. I'm going home where my heart can be loud, where the sky lets me dream past the clouds. The whispers of the morning air sing low through cracks where sunlight dares to glow. The river bends but never breaks its stride. Steady pulses guide the endless tide, flowing comfort down the stream tonight. Carry the weight, fade away the fight. Silver ripples glide and hold my soul tight. Flowing comfort paints the dark with light. The echoed hum of distant dreams collide with footsteps lost where memories reside. Each stone we skip through the breeze, soft currents prevail, flowing comfort down the stream tonight. Carry the weight, fade away the fight. Silver ripples glide and hold my soul tight, flowing comfort paints the dark with light. Tomorrow's whispers drift on waters wide. They nudge the stars, let destiny decide. And while I wait in rivers' calm embrace, the flow carves peace into my weathered face. Flowing comfort down the stream tonight. Carry the weight, fade away the fight. Silver ripples glide and hold my soul tight. Flowing comfort paints the dark with light.
A cup of coffee whispers wild, low, humming secrets only dreamers know. Swirls of steam like ghosts in flight, dancing through the morning light. Sip it slow, the truth will sing. In the warmth where the quiet clings, unspoken words like a soft refrain, a song of love in every grain. Black as night or golden cream, it spills the stories in between. Every sip a tale untold, bitter whispers sweet and bold. The mug sits heavy in your hand, a quiet witness, an open land. Its warmth a place for hearts to hide, where feelings brew and collide. Sip it slow, the truth will sing. of coffee, a secret guide to the restless thoughts we keep inside. Hold it close, feel its embrace. Unspoken words filled with grace. We all walk this road full of cracks and